You bring me down for all to see. Then switch it up and treat me right.
Kenna?
You promise sun, but you bring rain. I still love what you do to me.
How could you? How could you do that to me? So I'm guessing Jen didn't work out? Is it?
There is a specific kind of exhaustion that runs beneath Kenna's behavior at the start of this story. The exhaustion of someone who has spent a long time actively working against her own feelings rather than simply not having them. And this distinction matters enormously for how we understand her, because Kenna is not a woman confused about her own heart. She is a woman who knows exactly what she feels and has decided, for reasons the story lets us intuit rather than state outright, that acting on those feelings is too risky, too destabilizing, too likely to cost her the relationship she already has. And so, instead of confronting that feeling directly, she redirects all of her energy into finding Serena a soulmate elsewhere. A strategy that reads, on close inspection, less like generous friendship and more like a form of self-protective avoidance. A way of keeping busy with Serena's love life so she never has to sit still long enough to examine her own. This pattern, throwing herself into managing someone else's romantic prospects rather than confronting her own desire, will feel immediately familiar to many queer women, because it captures something true about how repression often doesn't look like silence or withdrawal. It frequently looks like frantic, well-intentioned activity, the busy work of caretaking that keeps a person perpetually one step ahead of the feelings she's trying to outrun, and Kenna's relentless matchmaking, however sincerely she may believe she's simply trying to help her friend find happiness, functions narratively as a form of displacement, a way of proving to herself that she is a supportive friend and nothing more, even as the exhausting, repeated failure of these blind dates suggests some part of her may be sabotaging the search without fully admitting it to herself. Serena's eventual frustration, her having had enough of Kenna's persistent campaign to find her a partner, deserves to be read as more than simple dating fatigue, because there is likely a deeper, harder-to-articulate frustration underneath it. The sense of being pushed towards strangers by the one person whose company already feels like exactly what she's looking for. And Serena's exhaustion with the process may be less about the disappointing dates themselves and more about the strange, painful irony of being encouraged toward romance by someone she may already suspect, on some unspoken level, that she wants that romance with, and this kind of proximity-based longing, wanting the person who is right in front of you while that same person keeps gesturing toward the door and pointing at other options, describes an ache that many queer women recognize from friendships that hovered for years in this exact charged, unresolved territory, close enough to feel the pull constantly, uncertain enough about whether it's reciprocated to ever act on it directly. Kenna's decision to take Serena to a nightclub as an act of amends carries its own quiet significance, because nightclubs and the loosening they permit, the music, the movement, the temporary suspension of ordinary self-consciousness, have long functioned as spaces where queer women have found it easier to let guardedness slip, not because anything about the space itself is inherently romantic, but because it offers built-in cover. The ability to be close, to be affectionate, to let a look linger a beat too long, all while maintaining the plausible deniability that everyone present is simply enjoying themselves, and Kenna's choice of this particular setting for her apology suggests, whether she consciously plans it this way or not, an instinctive gravitation toward a space that might finally let her guard down without the stark exposure of a direct, sober confession. The moment after the nightclub when Kenna lets her interests be known deserves careful attention precisely because of how much restraint precedes it, because the story has spent real time establishing Kenna's pattern of avoidance, her substitution of matchmaking energy for honest confrontation of her own heart, which means this moment of disclosure represents a genuine rupture in a long-maintained defense, not an easy or casual admission, but the collapse of a strategy she has been relying on for what may have been months or years. And the vulnerability of that collapse, of finally admitting the thing you've spent so much energy avoiding, carries real weight specifically because we've watched how hard Kenna worked to avoid ever having to feel it. What happens the following evening, when neither woman can continue repressing what's between them, deserves to be read not as sudden combustion, but as the natural conclusion of feelings that have clearly been present and mutual for a long time. Likely years, given the closeness implied by their status as longtime friends and roommates. And this timeline matters because it means whatever happens between them isn't a spontaneous, unconsidered impulse, but the release of something both women have been carrying separately, each unaware or uncertain whether the other carried it too. and the specific vertigo of finally learning that a feeling you assumed was yours alone to manage has actually been mirrored the entire time in someone you see every single day, is one of the most powerful and specific emotional experiences available to queer women, because it retroactively reframes years of shared domestic life, meals cooked together, quiet mornings, ordinary proximity, as having been charged all along with something neither woman felt safe enough to name. Kenna's eventual confession, and the story's choice to have her ask, with visible emotion, whether Serena will love her, deserves to be read against the backdrop of everything that came before, because this is not a woman confidently declaring her feelings and expecting reciprocation as a matter of course. This is a woman who has spent the entire story avoiding exactly this moment, finally forced by her own overwhelmed heart to ask a question she has clearly been terrified of asking. And her fear, made visible through her physical distress, her heaviness, her trembling, reflects something genuinely relatable to anyone who has ever loved a close friend and feared that naming the feeling risked destroying the relationship entirely. The particular terror of understanding that friendship, however deep, is not guaranteed to survive the disclosure of wanting more. Serena's hesitation in the face of this confession, her visible consideration of whether she can trust herself to someone she has previously known as indecisive, deserves to be honored rather than rushed past. Because Serena is not simply performing reluctance before an inevitable yes, she is genuinely weighing a real concern. Whether a person who has spent so long deflecting her own feelings through frantic avoidance is actually ready to commit to something real, or whether this confession represents another kind of impulsive behavior that might not hold once the immediate emotional intensity fades. And this hesitation models something valuable and often underrepresented in romance narratives. The recognition that genuine love requires not just the confession of feeling, but evidence of the follow-through, the demonstrated capacity to actually show up consistently, rather than simply declare intensity in a single overwhelming moment. And Serena's caution here reflects real self-respect, a refusal to hand over her trust simply because someone she's wanted for a long time has finally, tearfully, said the words. What makes this story worth taking seriously as a portrait of queer women's emotional lives is precisely this tension between the relief of finally speaking a long-buried truth and the harder, slower work of proving that the truth translates into something sustainable. Because Kenna's tears and trembling lip capture beautifully the terror of vulnerability after years of avoidance. But Serena's hesitation reminds us that vulnerability alone, however moving, isn't the same as trustworthiness. And whatever these two women build going forward will mean more and last longer, for having been built on Serena's willingness to ask this harder question rather than simply accepting the first tearful confession as proof enough that the years of avoidance are truly behind them.